All right, so good afternoon, everybody. My name is Karen, she, her pronouns, and I serve as the Associate Director for Student Involvement. I'm really excited that you all decided to come to this next session featuring my boss, the Director Angie Royal, as she talks a little bit about peaceful resolution. Yay, Andre's here. So as Andre comes in, basically, we're just really excited to have you all, like we said. I'm hopeful that you all will get a lot of good information out of this session as Angie does everything she possibly can for the betterment of our students. So super excited to have her here to take an hour of her time. Andre, since you are just now coming in, if you wouldn't mind just putting your first and last name in the chat, as well as any organizations that you're here representing, that would be great. But if at any time you all have any questions, just let Angie know, either unmute yourself or post in the chat, and then I'll try to keep an eye on both. So without further ado, I just want to introduce you all to Miss Angie Royal.
Hello, everyone. As Karen mentioned, I am Angie Royal. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I have proudly served as Director of Student Involvement at Lindenwood University since 2012. And one of the things I'm most proud that we have done over my 9 years is this added component of leadership development. So I am super thrilled to be able to join you all today and to speak to you about conflict resolution. And I think, what a real appropriate time to do this, in this day and age where we've had such divisiveness in our country. And so I hope that when you leave today, you at least have one tip that you have found helpful and that can help you when it does come to differences that you might have with someone, because we should celebrate our differences, right? Imagine our world if everyone thought the same, how boring that would be. So what I want to do first is get a little sense of kind of how comfortable you are when it comes to addressing conflict. So what I'd like for you to do is to grab like a scrap sheet of paper, or if you want to keep track in your phone, I'm going to read a statement and then I'm going to have you respond to it with a number. And then at the end, I'm going to have you tally that up. So you need some way to keep track. This is how we have to get creative in a virtual environment where I can't give you a worksheet to do. So grab something to jot this down on. And so what I'm going to do, friends, is I'm going to read a statement. And if that statement always applies to you, write down a 3. If it sometimes applies to you, write down a 2. And if it never applies to you, write down a 1. Okay? So for each statement, if it always applies to you, write down 3, sometimes 2, never 1. We got it? We good? All right. Here's our first statement. I see conflict as an opportunity. 3 always, 2 sometimes, 1 never. Conflict as an opportunity. All right, my next statement. I address conflict willingly without avoiding it or ignoring it. Always 3, sometimes 2, never 1. Go with your gut. Go with your gut answer, friends. Don't overthink it. All right, next statement. I speak directly to the key person in the conflict rather than complaining to a third party instead. Always 3, sometimes 2, never 1. I speak directly to the key person in the conflict, not to a third party. Okay, next statement. I listen patiently to the other party in the conflict. I don't interrupt. Always 3, sometimes 2, never 1. I listen patiently to the other party without interrupting. Okay, next statement. I separate the actual conflict from the feelings involved. Always 3, sometimes 2, never 1. Okay, the next statement. I express my views without making personal attacks on the other person. I express my views without personal attacks. Always 3, sometimes 2, never 1. Okay, the next statement. I use emotional self-control during a conflict. Always 3, sometimes 2, never 1. I use emotional self-control. Okay, next statement. I remain non-defensive even when someone attacks me. I remain non-defensive even when someone attacks me. Always 3, sometimes 2, never 1. 2 more, friends, we're almost done. All right, next statement. I am flexible when negotiating when it's appropriate. I am flexible when negotiating when appropriate. Always 3, sometimes 2, never 1. And then the last statement, I hold firmly to my position when it's appropriate. Always 3, sometimes 2, never 1. Okay, so you should have 10, there should be answers for 10 statements that I wrote down. So now what I want you to do is to total up your score for this exercise. All right, so did anybody score 27 to 30 on this? That's all right, I didn't either. If you scored 27 to 30, you probably have really strong conflict management skills, right? I would probably say, you know what, you might not need this session today. If you scored 18 to 26, anybody score 18 to 26? Okay, that means you're doing okay, but there's some room for improvement. And if you scored 10 to 17, I'm not gonna make you identify yourself, but you probably have some pretty big challenges when it comes to managing conflict. So I just wanted to have you do an honest look at yourself when it comes to conflict resolution, just so you can kind of see where you're at. And then my hope is by the time we finish this today, you feel a little better. We're not going to take the assessment again and have you see if your score changes, but I'm hoping that you can leave here with some tips that will help you feel a little better about conflict. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if I can find it. Okay, and hopefully you all can see my screen now. I'm sometimes technologically challenged, so hopefully we are good to go. So, all right, so we now have a little bit of a sense of how comfortable we are with conflict. So let's look at this scenario. So Will was so upset he could hardly eat his lunch. I've had it, he complained to his friend Beth. I just can't take any more of Antonio blaring his country music in our room. He's driving me crazy. All night long, that music is twanging away. It's been going on this entire semester. I can't concentrate on my homework. I can't hear the TV, and I can't even hear my mom on the phone when she calls. It's to the point where I don't even go to my room anymore except to sleep. Have you talked this over with Antonio? Beth asked. Well, no, Will answered hesitantly. I wouldn't want to hurt his feelings. I mean, he's an okay guy. Besides, how can I say anything now? He's been doing it all semester and I'm either stuck with it or I have to move out. So this is probably a common scenario that college students find themselves in, where maybe they have a roommate and there's just something that the two don't see eye to eye on. And unfortunately, in this situation, Will is handling this conflict the way that many of us do. And what is that? By not handling it, by totally ignoring it, right? So instead of discussing his concerns with Antonio, he pretends everything's okay and goes to a third party. So for all we know, Antonio doesn't even know that this bothers Will, that he's blaring his twanging country music all night. But what I bet Antonio probably notices is that Will's not coming around much anymore. and that Will's only coming into, the room to sleep. And so does that resolve the conflict? Does it provide any solution so that Will will start coming back into the room? No. In fact, what may happen is Antonio might start to make some assumptions about why Will isn't coming to the room. And then it can snowball and it can get worse, right? Oftentimes it does get worse when we don't address it. So I want y'all to take a second. Can you think of a situation where there was a conflict that you should have addressed that you simply chose to avoid? Anybody have any examples that they want to share? Have you ever had that happen where maybe it's something little that somebody does and it bothers you and you don't address it and then suddenly you explode on them because things have snowballed? Well, that's what we don't want to happen, right? We want you to get comfortable in addressing things as they occur so that they don't snowball and then you blow up and you freak out. Okay, Andre, you've got an example?
Yes. Speaking of roommates, it's just like, and it takes a lot to get me angry. Like I'm a pretty laid back person, but it's just like when I see hair in the shower,
Okay.
and it just I thought maybe it's like, okay, it's not bothering me. I could just, just take it off, but it just kept occurring every single day and I kept on brushing it off to the point where I was like, there was just hair everywhere. It was hair in the drain, hair, just hair everywhere. It just looked so disgusting. I didn't want to shower in there. And so I just got to the point where I'm just like, oh my God, will you pick up your damn hair in the shower? Sorry. So
Oh, feel free.
Yeah, excuse me. I got too passionate about that. Flashback. But I ended up leaving a note for my roommate, and apparently she didn't get the message because there was still hair everywhere until finally I just had enough. I was like, oh my gosh, will you please just pick up your hair, get it off the shower? That is disgusting. And she's like, well, why didn't you tell me beforehand? Well, it was this whole back and forth thing.
Right.
So needless to say, I didn't see her again.
Right. And if you can remember back, Andre, to your emotions the first time that you saw hair in the shower, was it enough to make you want to blow up? Probably not.
Yeah, probably not.
Probably not. But because it continued to happen, you just kept getting angrier and angrier, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so what we want to do is try and avoid that because, on the other hand, while avoiding conflict isn't good, attacking people and losing your mind on them isn't good either, right? Then that can make enemies and destroy friendships. So now, what I'm hoping that we get to today is that we find our voice and the courage to respectfully bring up issues when they occur so that you don't lose your mind and scream and yell at somebody, because then when you do that, they're on the defensive and the message still doesn't get across to them, right? So that is my hope today. So before we go into some actual tips, I want you to think about, so Andre, you can certainly use your situation with your roommate, or you can come up with a different one. The rest of you come up with a situation where you have been in a conflict with someone. It could be a friend, a loved one, a teacher, someone you worked for. So think about a situation where you've had a conflict. And I want you to think about and reflect back on kind of the feelings or the reasons or the situations that maybe could have been a cause of that conflict, or could have at least been related to your anger in that situation. All right, so again, think about it. Think about a situation where you were in a conflict, and I'm going to just read a statement. And if you think this feeling that I'm bringing up, or this circumstance that I'm bringing up may have added to your tension with this conflict, I want you to raise your hand. You can either just raise it if you have your camera on, or you can actually use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. But again, take yourself back to a conflict you had with someone. And when you think about that conflict, could part of a cause of your anger have been that maybe you were just really stressed out at the time? If that could have been an underlying cause to that situation, raise your hand. Okay. All right. And again, you can raise it in your camera, or you can just use the raise your hand feature on Zoom. Okay. Is it possible that during this time of conflict, you may have been angry at someone else and you misdirected your anger in this situation to that person? I know I have done that, where I'm upset with someone else and then somebody else does something and I'm just like, wah! I'm like, whoa. I'm like, I really wasn't angry at you. I was angry at something else, right? Have you ever had a reaction to someone in a conflict, or the way that you reacted because you were trying to fit in or impress other people? Have you ever had somebody come to you and be like, so-and-so said something about you, and then you feel pressured where you have to call them out about it? Has that ever happened to any of you? Okay, take yourself back to that conflict. At the time that this conflict happened, were you having any other problems, whether it be problems at home, problems in a relationship, problems at school? Or maybe you going through just a rough time. I'm asking you these things because I want you to see that sometimes there are outside forces that contribute to conflict. And what I hope that we can learn how to do today is how to compartmentalize those things and really only address the conflict that's in front of us, and not bring in all that baggage that we might have with us. So I just want you to keep that in mind as we go through some things today. All right. So why are so many people hesitant to deal with conflict, right? So when we did our little assessment at the beginning of the session today, we didn't have anybody that scored that 27 to 30 that said we were masters at conflict. Most people are hesitant to address conflict. And why? Because I think we believe these myths about conflict. The very first one that's a common myth is that it's bad to have conflict. How many of you were raised that, we should always try and get along with others, and we should always be nice, right? You don't want to be mean. I know that's the way I was raised. But friends, that can go too far, right? When you have a valuable idea or opinion, it's important to be able to speak up. We should be able to be respectful with others, and still be able to say, hey, actually, I think this way, which may be different from the way you think, and that not be an issue. But it's all in the way that you handle it, right? And so that's what we're going to really go into today, are better ways to handle it. So that's the first myth, that it's bad to have conflict. It's actually really good to have conflict. Again, could you imagine a world where we all thought exactly the same? How boring would that be? I mean, I love a good, healthy debate, right? So don't always view conflict as bad. The second myth of conflict that can sometimes cause us to not want to engage in it is that we view conflict as a fight. There has to be one winner and one loser. Well, that's not always the case. In effective conflict resolution, both sides come out as winners, because we're both able to see the other person's side, and we can reach a compromise, and we actually both win in that situation. So stop thinking of the person that you're in a conflict with as your opponent or your enemy, and think of them more as your partner, that together we are going to reach a compromise in this situation. And I think if you both view yourselves as partners, you're more likely to peacefully resolve that conflict. And then the third and final myth that can sometimes stop people from wanting to deal with conflict is that, a good team or a good relationship or a good friendship never has any conflict. We agree on absolutely everything. Now, if you think back to, take a second to think about if you're in a relationship with someone right now. Karen, I'm going to use you as an example. Do you and Simon agree on absolutely everything?
I don't like how he opens the foil, like, the little foil thing. He just opens the side and I'm like, why do you do that? But if I just let it keep going on and don't address it, then I'm going to blow up versus saying,
About something
honey,
else, right?
this is how you open the foil.
That's hysterical. I'm going to forever remember that when I see Simon.
It's not a hard concept.
Right. But I can't imagine that any of us have a friendship, a relationship that is completely devoid of conflict. There has to be something that person does that you differ on. And it can be something as small as the foil, or it can be something large, like their views on politics or their views on equity, right? So we have to identify and recognize and admit that conflict does happen. It's actually healthy. You should be in a situation where you're comfortable enough to find your voice and speak up, when you have a difference of opinion. You should want people around you that challenge you, right? I love when somebody comes at me and they have a different opinion than I do, because I'm like, oh, I never thought about it that way, right? So, and also, you should be able to be comfortable enough to question decisions, but you have to do it in a way that still shows respect for the individual and that you're committed to progress with that person. So don't avoid conflict, friends. You can actually learn so much from conflict. So, what are the benefits of handling conflict appropriately? How amazing does it feel when you're in a space where you can have a voice and that people will listen to it, right? They don't have to agree with everything that you're saying, but they will listen and respect that you are coming from a different place than them. That's such a cool place to be in. Karen and I, we have a very good working relationship together, but she knows she can come to me if a decision's being made and she can say, I don't know that I agree with that. Or I can come to Karen if our team is working on something and I can say, ooh, I don't know if I like that direction. And we can, in a respectful space, talk about that. So Karen doesn't feel, I hope you don't, Karen, I hope I'm not speaking for you, doesn't feel uncomfortable to come to me. And, just because I have the word director behind my name does not mean that I'm all knowing and that I don't make mistakes, right? So it's nice to know that you can be in an environment with different ideas and that people will listen. Like I mentioned earlier, I love to have a good debate, but you have to be very careful about how you approach it because it can't be attacking to anyone. The moment you cross the line and you make it personal and attacking, their wall comes up. And now it's no longer a productive conversation. They're now on the defense. So being able to argue in a productive and healthy way, differing opinions actually can help expand your mind and can help you gain new thoughts and new ideas. By handling conflict appropriately, we can preserve relationships, not damage them. We can have a difference. Karen and I can not see eye to eye on something, but we can respect that, okay, I see where you're coming from. I'm not going to say that I wholeheartedly agree with it, but I'm going to trust that that's the right direction that we should go, right? So that doesn't damage our relationship just because she and I don't agree on absolutely everything. And again, in fact, I tell my team when I hire them and we have our first meeting, I don't like yes people. I don't like people just to say, yes, Angie, yes, Angie, yes, Angie. I want you to say, ooh, I don't know about that. maybe we should think about this in a different way. I like that. I love having those different voices around the table. Another benefit to handling conflict appropriately is that you might come across viewpoints that you've never thought of before. And again, you can start to think differently and take on new ideas, and you can be creative with solutions. If I were to have an environment in student involvement where no one could question my decisions, my gosh, I'm an old woman. The activities on campus would be boring as all get out because I'm 30 years older than all of you, right? But because my team knows that they can throw out ideas and creative solutions, we actually can offer a wider variety of things. But unfortunately, friends, there are people that you may work for one day that don't welcome that. And then that does stifle your creativity. So it does help us come up with creative solutions to things when we have different opinions. As I mentioned earlier, we can still respect each other even though we don't agree on things. And I would hope that that makes our time together more enjoyable to know, hey, when we do have a difference, it doesn't mean that the relationship is severed and that we hate each other and we cannot work together. We can have that respectful conversation together, and we can sometimes just agree to disagree. So those are all some really great benefits of what can happen when you learn how to handle conflict appropriately. But unfortunately, there are people who simply cannot handle conflict appropriately. And let's see if you fall into any of these categories, because I will admit that I have fallen into some of these categories before. So what are the negative ways that you can handle conflict? The first one is the firecracker. That's the person that just blows up all of a sudden. They react. They don't really think about it. They're just like, what do you mean you don't agree with me? And they just blow up on you. Now that person might apologize to you for it happening, but you're probably going to know in the back of your head the next time you may have a conflict with them, you're probably going to be a little defensive. You're like, whoa, I wonder if they're going to blow up on me. Can you all think of people in your life who are firecrackers? And maybe that's you. You could potentially be a firecracker. It's okay. We're going to hopefully work on that today. All right. Andre, you're a firecracker?
Yes, because I'm just so passionate about things, and it's just like, I mean, especially when it comes to like social justice and civil rights, it's just like, oh gosh, that's the thing that makes me angry.
I'm with you, Andre, and in fact, I just my team and we were reflecting on our experience with Day of Dialogue. Day of Dialogue was last week, and it was a day where we had a number of conversations about equity and inclusion. And I am like you, Andre. If I see somebody on social media and they say something that's racist, sexist, homophobic, whatever it is, man, I go in hard. I'm that firecracker. I'm just like, boom, explode. Here we go. And I learned at Day of Dialogue a very valuable lesson that maybe instead of being that firecracker and just blowing up, I need to approach it more from an educational lens. Like, no, I don't believe you're racist, but can you see how this statement is racist? It's because when you call somebody out and call them out personally, then their wall comes up and now they're not hearing you, right? So I feel you, friend. I can be that firecracker too. Now, another negative way that we can handle conflict is the cold shoulder, i.e. ghosting someone. Have you ever had that when somebody just makes you mad and you're like, well, I'm just not going to talk to them. I don't feel like arguing, but guess what? I'm not going to return their text. I'm not going to call them. If I see them coming on campus, I'm going to turn and go the other way. How many of you have ever ghosted or cold shouldered someone? Yep, I've done it too. I'm going to admit my faults, right? Another negative way that we handle conflict is by backstabbing, where to that person's face, you might smile and act like everything is fine, but then you go behind their back and you talk to someone else, like our first scenario where Will, instead of going to Antonio, went to Beth instead, right? That's not good either, because guess what? When you go to that other person, one, you never know, they may go to the person that you're talking about and let them know now you look like you're not trustworthy, right? Another one is, I like this one, memory lane, where you just bring up every issue from the past, even though you think you've got it resolved. Nope, but don't you remember 2 years ago when you said or did this to me? Always reliving those past issues that have occurred. Any of you like to travel down memory lane when you have an argument with someone and then you bring up everything else they've done wrong to you from the past? Again, I've been guilty of that. Trivial fights. So, we talked about how when you don't address the real issue at hand, these little petty things you might pick a fight about when it's really not about that, right? Because you haven't addressed the real matter at hand. So Andre, in your situation with the hair in the shower, there may have been other things going on at the time. Maybe you and your roommate were having a bigger situation. Maybe not, but there could have been some bigger things going on. Like maybe you didn't feel like your roommate was respecting the space, but the hair in the shower was just the little thing that you could point to, right?
Yeah.
And then sometimes we can forget the heart of the matter when we pick little trivial fights.
And I also had a big fight with my aunt, so that made things worse.
Okay, right?
So,
right. So you were probably on edge a little bit, right?
mhm.
And then the last one is that whole having the last word. How many of you have to get that last word in, that last dig in? You might throw an insult their way and then walk off. And then you're like, yeah, I got them, right? Is conflict really over when you threw that last dig before you ghosted them or before you walked away? Probably not, right? So there are really bad ways to handle conflict. And I think we all can, because I saw lots of head shaking, that we've all been guilty of some of these things, right? And while some of these are very different types of reactions, they all have one thing in common. The one thing that they have in common is that we are in denial about the conflict itself. Denial occurs when you use your energy in some way other than talking with the key person about the issue. And the result of that is that things typically get worse, right? I can't imagine in any of these situations that things get better after you blow up on somebody, after you ghost them, after you talk about them behind their back, after you bring up all of the past things they've done wrong, after you walk off with that final dig at them, right? That makes things worse typically. So what we have to do is we have to think about better ways to handle them. But before we can go into the effective ways to resolve conflict, I want you to think about the way in which you communicate people and these things that may block that ability to communicate with others. So let's talk about some communication blocks. The first one is interrupting or dominating the conversation. How many of you have been in situations where you're trying to talk to someone about something and they just keep interrupting you or they talk over you, right? Oh, that's so frustrating. People typically interrupt for a few different reasons. One, they get impatient. They can't wait to be able to say what it is they're wanting to say. And so they talk on top of the person, that they're in the conflict with. Sometimes people interrupt because they don't want to forget that thing that they want to say. And a lot of times people interrupt because they're more interested in their own thoughts and they're not listening to the other person. They're listening to respond, not listening to understand the situation. So that can be a big block. So I challenge all of you, try your best not to interrupt when you are trying to address a conflict with someone. even if like I'm getting older and I'm afraid I'm going to forget what I wanted to, so I sometimes will have to write it down. I take a quick second to write it down, shift my focus back to them so I can continue to hear what they're saying, but try your best not to interrupt, but also not to dominate the conversation. Let it be a balanced conversation. So it's not just like, have you ever gotten out of a time you were talking with someone and you were like, man, I feel like I was the only one talking. We want to try and keep it as balanced as possible. All right, another block to communication, which I think we go into this with good intentions, but it can backfire on us, is advising. So, you know, when someone comes to you and you say, well, if I were you, I would X, or if it were me, I would have done this, or, you know, take my advice, do this. By giving people advice when they don't ask for it, you almost take on a persona of superiority, like you're better than them. And then that again can put that wall up that blocks that communication. Judging is another way that we can put a roadblock up when we're trying to communicate with others. You know, that again also assumes a superior situation or a superior position in a conversation. Probing is another way. Believe it or not, asking too many questions can put people on the defensive, because then you feel like you're being interrogated. And it's like, oh my gosh, why so many questions? Or do you not trust me, or do you not trust my judgment? Accusing or contradicting yourself. You don't want to try and be accusatory in any way. Criticizing, name calling, putting down, you know, don't make it personal when you're trying to address conflict with people. Stick to the facts. So these are just things I want you to think about as we talk about these 6 steps to resolving conflict, which is our next piece. All right. So the first step, my friends, is you have to actually address it. You have to start the process, right? So in order to start this process, what you need to do is you need to calmly approach the person. So what that may mean, my friends, don't do it immediately. So let's say, Nicholas, that you get a text that your friend has said something bad about you behind your back. If you are not calm when you go to approach that friend, wait. Sometimes what I will do is I'll go take a walk. I'll go count somewhere where I can count to 10. We've got a punching bag in the 3rd floor track over at Evans. I can go kick that a few times. And sometimes I just have to tell myself, wait till tomorrow to respond to this. If you wake up tomorrow and you still feel that this needs responded to, go ahead and respond. Or I may type up a big nasty response that I then delete. Be careful, make certain you delete it. Make certain you don't accidentally hit send, because I've done that before, right? So calmly approach the person and explain that you have something that you would like to discuss with them. Don't go in hard, and you need to be very calm and say that you have something that you would like to discuss with them and that you want their help in resolving this problem, right? Then we make it collaborative. Remember, we're not attacking. We want this to be a win-win situation. And then maybe, you might have to set some ground rules. You might have to say, okay, can we agree? We're not going to interrupt each other. We're not going to name call. We're certainly not going to get physical. We don't ever want it to get physical. We're not going to bring up the past. We're going to talk about this issue at hand. So that is the first step. And I think it's easier to do when you're calm than when you're reacting to a situation. All right, then here's the big one, my friends. When you share your concern, use facts and feelings. And what always works best for me is to use what are called I statements, not Karen, you did this to me. No, what's better is to start with, Karen, I would like to discuss with you how this made me feel. Not you did this to me, but I would like to share with you how this makes me feel. Talk about the specific behavior that you don't like and how you want to resolve the problem. So let's think about, let's see if you all can come up with some examples. So let's say that I have an employee who shows up late for work every day. How could I use an I statement to explain to that employee my concern? Does anybody want to give it a go? Okay, let me tell you how I shouldn't. Nicholas, do you want to try? I thought I saw a hand
That's
up.
a tough one. I was shrugging.
Okay. Well, here's how I wouldn't approach it, right? So let's say I have an employee that's coming in late every day. I'm not going to go to that employee and be like, what's wrong with you? Why can you not get up for work on time, right? Because is that going to resolve things peacefully? No. But what I could say is, hey, Karen's never late, so I can use her as an example. Hey, Karen, I've noticed that you've been arriving at work late consistently. Unfortunately, that makes me have to try and be here even earlier for fear that our office won't be open. Is there something going on that I can help you with so that we can both get here on time? Or by, hey, Karen, I've noticed that, you've had some issues arriving to work on time. Explain how that affects the team. Okay, well, yesterday I was in a meeting at 8 o'clock, so no one was here to let our student workers in. So now Karen can see how her tardiness affected others. But I'm not going, what's wrong with you? Can't you set an alarm? Don't you know to leave early, right? So make it an I statement. Let them know how it affects, how their behavior affects you, but how willing you are to together come up with a solution so that we're both comfortable. And then you might even want to, just to make certain they're listening, just ask, like, are you understanding what I'm saying? Like, and Karen knows that if we're in a situation with an employee where there's a performance concern, we may ask them to repeat back to us. Can you share with us what you've taken from this conversation, right? So that is the first step, is to use your facts and feelings and use I statements, not you. When you point the finger and you use you statements, they've shut down. So be very specific. Don't be vague. Don't say, I can never count on you. That's vague. But what you can say is, when you forgot our meeting yesterday, this is how it impacted me, right? All right, so that's the first step. You have to start by addressing the situation. All right, now, once you have shared your side, friends, you have to let them share their side of the situation. This has been one of my biggest mistakes that I've made in resolving conflict in the past, where I didn't give the other person the opportunity to share their side. So while they are sharing, my friends, listen not to respond, but listen to understand. Pay attention to more than just the words they're saying. Look at their body language. Look at their facial expressions. Do they have their arms crossed? Because that's a sign that they're defensive. Now here's where it gets tricky. It gets tricky to pay attention to those kinds of things when this is, because y'all like to do lots of conflict resolution via a text message or an email, right? So that can be harder to see. You need to be actively listening to them so much that you could say back to them what they're saying to you, not preparing your response. And that's where I think we make the biggest mistake, is we are listening and getting in our mind ready. Okay, well, this is what I'm going to say back to them. And that's wrong. Try and be empathetic. Put yourself in their shoes and try and see where they're coming from. Maybe Karen is being late to work every day because Karen has to stop by her mother's house before work and feed her in the morning because she's disabled, right? So there may be things going on that we need to be empathetic about. So try and put yourself in their shoes and show that empathy. And while you're listening to them, put aside your own opinions. Try and be open-minded and hear what they're trying to say. Again, don't interrupt. Let them take their time to say what they have to say. And then when they're finished, I think it is always helpful to say back to the person, okay, Karen, I want to make certain I'm understanding where you're coming from in this. And then you kind of summarize what they shared as their side of the situation. So 1, we make certain we get it right. And 2, they know you listened to them and they're going to be more receptive to this compromise that hopefully we're going to be reaching now that they feel heard. Because friends, so much of a communication breakdown is because one of the parties involved does not feel heard in the situation. All right, next step. Now that we've each shared our side, we need to start coming up with what we're going to do to resolve this. So we really have to think, what is the cause of the problem? And remember, we talked about, I shared those scenarios. Is there something else going on at home? Were you just already in a bad mood? Or, what is the true cause of the conflict? And again, it could be multiple things going on. And then what we need to do is hopefully we agree that we are going to work through this and we are going to resolve the issue, which then brings us to that next step. This has to be a collaboration. We have to figure out what we can do. So in my situation with Karen, where she's showing up for work late every day, we need to throw out there all of our possible solutions. Is it that, hey, we're going to actually need to adjust Karen's time. So she actually, instead of being in the office at 8, maybe it works better for her to work 8:30 to 5:30 instead of 8 to 5. Or, maybe Karen agrees, maybe I do just need to leave a little earlier, or maybe I do need to just wake up a little earlier. So we need to make certain that both sides are sharing, their thoughts on how to resolve this. And then together we come up with what the solution is. But we have to make certain it's something that's feasible to do, right? Unfortunately, there may be some companies that wouldn't be willing to adjust your start time, right? So you have to make certain you find out what can be done. You have to make certain it's not going to harm anybody in any way. And is the solution going to prevent the problem from happening again? Because if it's not, then we've just wasted our time coming up with a solution, right? And then finally, wrap it up. Thank them for taking the time to chat with you and to work with you to solve the problem. If unfortunately you've done all of these things and you're still at an impasse, you may need to seek out a third party to help out, but make certain it is a neutral third party. So for example, Emily, if you're having a situation with members of your organization, there's nothing wrong with asking me to sit down with the two of you and hear both sides of the situation. And as a neutral third party say, okay, here's what I'm hearing. Here's what I'm hearing happen from this side, from this side. Let's see if we can together reach a solution. Because sometimes you need that neutral third party who doesn't have a dog in the fight, who's not going to benefit from this, but that can help both of you see where you can give a little, because compromise is important. And sometimes, friends, you just have to agree to disagree. Sometimes, no matter how hard you try to reach a solution, either one of the parties isn't open to it or there just is no peaceful solution. But what you can agree to do is disagree peacefully. All right. So I want to leave you with some final tips and then certainly leave time for any questions that you might have. And hopefully you've walked away at least with something that you can use when you get into a conflict with someone. but to hopefully keep your conflict resolution positive. Remember, focus on the issue, not the person. Do not make it personal. Don't name call. Don't attack. Focus on the issue itself. That's the big one, because I think we so quickly jump to making it personal, and that's where people shut down. Again, the biggest thing, listen, listen, listen. And again, listen to hear and to understand, not to respond. So block out all other distractions, focus intently on what that other person is saying so that you could even repeat it back to them if you needed to. Don't dredge up things from the past. Focus on the issue at hand and how we're going to move to a better future together. Don't play the blame game, because again, that's going to put people's walls up, and then there's going to be no solution there because people are feeling attacked. Really watch your tone and those nonverbals that you give. And I want to talk for just a second about tone in a text message or in an email. My friends, it is so easy to misinterpret tone in a text or an email, right? I have had, and I wish I could remember the exact thing that I said, but I will never forget my very first year at Lindenwood. I'm pretty sure my sentence was just, "What are you doing?" And I accidentally put an exclamation mark after "What are you doing?" instead of a question mark. And I was legitimately asking our LSG president at the time, "What are you doing?" There was a situation that they were planning, meaning like what's happening at this event, not "What are you doing?" And he came to my office, he's like, "Oh my gosh, Angie, am I in trouble?" And I'm like, whoa, 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 no, 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 no. And he's like, "Well, I mean, you kind of yelled at me in your email." And I'm like, "Oh my goodness, David, I'm so sorry. That was just a typo. I accidentally typed an exclamation as opposed to a question mark." So I always encourage you, and Karen knows I'll do this. There are days that I will simply read a message to her or have her, or I'll forward it to her and have her read it. And I say, is my tone, like, is there any way that my tone can be misinterpreted in this? And so she'll point out to me, "Well, this could maybe be taken this way." So be very mindful of that things, especially in text, can be very easily misinterpreted. How many of you have ever misinterpreted a text or a message that's electronic? Because I know I sure have. I sure have. All right, here's another one that I see happen frequently, and it does not do anything productive, friends. When you have a situation, especially with a coworker, a member of your organization, don't involve the higher ups until it's necessary. Don't go straight to President Porter if you have an issue with a faculty member. Who should you talk to first? The faculty member, right? There's a chain of command for a reason. Try and resolve it with them. If that doesn't work, then you go to, the appropriate channels, and every academic school is different, but it might be that you go to the dean of the school. But there have been so many times that people will go straight to the top when they want a solution, when this very easily could have been resolved if you would have just mentioned something to the person who was at the appropriate level. Like, I will never forget, a few years ago, I got a phone call. Our former President Shanrock, called me, and he said, "Angie, I just got my Twitter blown up because there's a TV in the rec center that's not working." And I'm like, what? Like, that could have been, I could have had that. I mean, it wasn't that it wasn't working, it wasn't turned on. So rather than, and President Shanrock was a busy man, so it took him hours to respond to that. Well, heck, I could have had that TV on. I wasn't aware that it was off, but we could have had that on for you in a matter of moments. So just try not to involve, if you have an issue with a member of your sorority, don't involve the honor board immediately. Try and work it out amongst yourselves first. And then this last one, friends, we do live in a time now where that is thick with cancel culture. Like, the moment somebody doesn't agree with you, we want them gone. We don't want to try and repair this relationship. We want them gone. And that, again, it doesn't do anything for anybody if we just eliminate people, right? Without trying to get them to understand our side and to try and reach a peaceful compromise. All right. We shouldn't try and destroy people or their reputations because we disagree with them. What we should try to do instead is educate and transform them. That's my 2 cents on that, right? All right. Well, I wanted to leave you all with my contact information, because even with all these tips, sometimes, especially in your student organizations, you might find a situation where you cannot resolve a conflict. I am always here to help you navigate through that and to help have you sit down and talk it out. And we can come up with a great compromise. So definitely take down my contact info. I'm here however you need me. All right. So my friends, does anybody have any questions for me about conflict resolution? Anthony, go ahead.
I want to say thank you, Ms. Royal and Ms. Smith, for putting this on today. I really apologize for showing up late. I just couldn't find the link, and then I couldn't get my sound to work out.
No worries.
So I'm the COO at my company, and I've got a staff of 61. So I really echo what you're saying about going to the top first. Because 2 quick anecdotes. I recently had a frontline staff member come to me about something minor that it's actually inappropriate for me to actually interfere. Now, to cut the leg off against from my staff to handle that. I was interested and I monitored it, but I told them the right direction to go. And then when I was a freshman at Lindenwood as an undergrad, I lived in Cobb's Hall and I had a single room and there were no screens in my room. And this went on for the 2nd, 3rd, 4th week of the year. And right about the same time OJ got acquitted, I was tired of not having my screen. So I contacted a guy named Dennis Spellman. I didn't know who he was, except that he was the boss. And well, I had to live with that through the maintenance department for the rest of the season, so that year, that I went to the president of the university over some screens. Now, of course, if they would have handled their business 3 weeks earlier, I wouldn't have had the problem, but
Correct.
I got my screens pretty quick. So probably I didn't learn anything, but, I can definitely see what you're saying about, handling things as they're put in there.
Yeah.
And then when I did, you were on a roll, so maybe you didn't see my hand raised, but
I'm sorry.
that's okay. For a while when I was a mid-level manager, I would speak to my people and I could see they would have an answer chambered and ready to say something before I was finished talking. And so I would say to them, what did you hear? Why don't you say that back to me? And they felt that was condescending and almost bullying. And maybe it was because I'm not as huggy-feely as maybe I could have been. And a lot of what I heard here, basically if Cameron didn't show up at 8 o'clock and he needed her at 8 o'clock, we'd have a performance improvement plan, not how's your mom doing, because I need her there at 8. Otherwise I would have scheduled her for 8:30.
Right.
So I understand, where there is opportunity to have some type of negotiation, that's great. But sometimes that's not always there. And, as you get out in the workforce, you see that, that normally, your boss wants you to do something and that's when you're supposed to do it.
Right. That's a very good point, that there are going to be some situations where there's not the opportunity to negotiate, right? Like you said, there is a very clear expectation set. And so hopefully though, you and your employer can find a compromise that it might not be exactly what you want. You're right. I mean, and Karen and I have actually had that with another employer. It's like, well, no, we're going to have to do a corrective action plan now. But hopefully there are ways that you can find to just talk about the situation. And a lot of times, and I can say this because I'm older, is there's a different mindset with different generations. And I know I found, which was shocking to me because I worked my way through college, that for some students, when they go out into the workforce, that may be their very first position. And they truly may not know that if they are told to be there at 8 o'clock, that means, I mean, for me, if I'm told to be there at 8 o'clock, that actually means I get there at 7:50. But there's not always that same mindset. So I think we as employers also have to be very clear with our teams what the expectation is and what my thoughts are on punctuality and because I have found myself not doing that. And I'm like, oh man, I dropped the ball here because I didn't make that expectation clear. So I totally get it, Anthony, totally get it. And those are great examples. And thank you for sharing your real world experience with us. And yeah, you made a perfect point too about the screens. When we do go straight to the top, sometimes we do cut ourselves off the knees. We do sometimes permanently damage relationships that we might need again in the future because it breaks a trust with that person. And Karen knows, she and I have been in a situation where some higher ups were involved when it was unnecessary. And I was like, wow, that really makes me not want to work as closely with that person again for fear that they're always going to go straight to the top when it's something that was just a miscommunication that we could have resolved like that. So I do think there are appropriate situations, though, 100% where higher ups need to be involved. But I think a lot of times I see this more and more today where we just jump straight to the top instead of even bothering to try and work it out at the appropriate level. So thank you so much for sharing that, Anthony. And I apologize if I missed chats, if I missed questions coming in. When I'm sharing my screen, I can't, for some reason, I can't always get into the chat. So was there any other thing, friends, that any other thoughts that you had, any other questions, situations you want some help with? You're like, no, Angie, it's 5 o'clock. It's time for dinner. I'm hungry. It's nice outside. I want to get out of here. Go ahead, Andre.
So I'm the person who I don't particularly like conflict because like I have so much experience with bad conflicts. It's kind of hard to differentiate. Oh my gosh, I can't talk.
I gotcha.
Okay, so it's kind of hard to
differentiate.
Okay. Oh gosh. It's kind of hard to separate the two.
Right.
Because to me, like conflict is almost like a poison in a way to me. Because like it was just, I've had so much conflict in my life, I'm almost sick of it. And I'm just that type of person, like I just want peace. And so that's why when I was identifying the different things, like firecracker, cold shoulder, all that, I put in the chat, I'm just gonna keep my hand up because I have done all of these.
Oh, I have two, friend. I have two.
So I just want to learn to, how can I have, even though I don't necessarily agree with the person, how can I have an open heart and just listen without, especially when it comes to like civil rights issues and social, all that.
Right. Yeah, there are going to be things that we are extremely passionate about that do make it hard for us to be patient and to listen and to try and be empathetic. And I think my best piece of advice again would be just try not to just react. Really try and take a moment to process what is being said. And, you might even, Andre, want to talk to someone else first and just be like, hey, here's what's going on. Here's what I want to say. Here's how I want to react to this. Can we talk through a more appropriate way for me to address this? And I think just by being open, the fact that you've mentioned, I do want to learn how to better address this. I think that's almost the first step in the battle, is recognizing that, hey, maybe I have had some traumatic experiences to conflict in the past. And so I am open to learning better ways. And friend, no, you can always come bounce ideas off to me. And I tell you students a lot, you can come yell at me all you want, just to vent and get some things off your chest. So sometimes we just need to find a way to get that initial gut, just anger out of the way, because there are times I know my conversation with this person is not going to be productive if I speak to them right now. So what's the point, right? So I just need to take a moment, like I said, go walk around the track, kick the punching bag a few times. Usually I go into Karen's office and shut her door and I'm like, I need to vent. And I just make certain I'm more calm and focused when I do then address that person. Because again, if I'm just being reactive and nasty and name calling, it's not productive at all. Nothing good comes of it. In fact, things can get worse.
That's so true.
What else, my friends? Any other questions or anything else I can help with while you have me?
I just wanted to say, for me, what I need to work on is avoiding misunderstandings.
Okay.
And like all those different things of how you may react uh, can lead to misunderstandings, which would
Yeah.
lead to even more conflict that you don't even know about.
Mhm.
So, yeah, just trying to learn how to do that better is everything.
Well, I think too, I was thinking about my own reactions to things as I was writing this. And one of the things that I have tried to do a better job of, how I mentioned, like, sometimes I need a moment before I can engage in this conversation. Rather than just not responding at all for days, because then that can come across as ghosting or, cold shoulder, I might say, hey, can I get back to you on this? And I don't always say, oh, I need time to process this. I just say, yeah, there is something that we need to discuss. I promise you, I'm not pushing you off, but I'm going to get back to you tomorrow on that. And then that gives me the time to calm down, most importantly, so that I'm not flying off the handle just in anger. Because I think, man, when we react in anger, and I've done it a lot, it can really make the situation worse. And sometimes you damage relationships beyond repair. So yeah, I try to be as clear as I can these days, even when it's uncomfortable. Go ahead, Anthony.
Nicolas brings up a good point about communication. And the most frustrating thing for me as a supervisor, as you moved up in levels, is when there is a miscommunication. And so to avoid that, you brought up the texting and tone. Anytime there's possible disciplinary action or a point I need to get across, I try to do that face to face. And so there is no misunderstanding. And if there is, we can fix it right away.
Right.
And the old saying that you praise in public and discipline in private. So I will have a one-on-one with a person and we'll decide that face to face. But then if it's accolades, well, I'll send out a mass email and blow that up to everybody, because when someone is successful and they do something well, they should be praised for it. And then at the same time, if they falter, I don't need to drag them through the mud in front of everybody. They just need to be told once. We're all adults. I don't need to beat somebody up and tell them about their TPS reports every day. We just handle it once. Nobody got the office reference there. How old is this group? Anyhow, I don't need to tell everybody about their TPS reports. We just simply tell them once and that's it.
I got it. I was wondering if anybody else got it.
Well, I have to admit, and my team knows, I've tried to watch The Office. I've not gotten past the first few episodes, and people keep telling me just power through, and I just haven't. I haven't yet.
It's a movie, not the TV.
Oh, not the show The Office. Oh, what are you talking about? Office Space?
Office Space. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Office
Okay.
Space.
I got you there.
TPS reports. Right.
Okay. But I will say something too that we have found that we've needed to do a few times too, Anthony. I totally agree. When it is, when you have to provide critical feedback to somebody, doing it in person is absolutely the best way to go. However, we have had situations where we do then have to, after the conversation, we do a follow-up in writing, just so it's documented that, this is the conversation, and it's not to, beat a dead horse and relive it again, but really we try and frame it as, just as a recap of our conversation today, boom, 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 we trust that we're going to see nothing but progress moving forward. Thanks and have a great day. So,
but that's legal too. That we have to cover ourselves, because if there is termination and then, we have to talk about unemployment and whatnot, and we have to show that we had a program improvement plan and we gave you warnings and you were given a written directive on exactly how you were supposed to improve. And you chose to not do it. So, you said, forget it. So there you go.
Yep, for sure. For sure. All right, friends, is there any other questions, any other thoughts? Well, again, I thank you for hanging out with me on this beautiful day. I know you'd probably much rather have been outside, but if you come across situations and you just want to chat about it, you all have my contact information. Just shoot me an email, shoot me a call, and I'm more than happy to just kind of help you process through it.
Awesome. So thanks, Angie. But before you all go, I do want to just formally thank Angie for spending this last hour and 13 minutes with us. I gained some really great, valuable tools. I hope that you all did. Like Angie said, if you have any questions or want to just kind of talk through stuff with us, we both are available to assist with that. And you may just connect with Anthony on LinkedIn, and maybe he can kind of help point you to some examples to how to resolve conflicts. So I am going to send a post-event survey in the chat. So if you could please make sure to take that. That is really good information for me to better understand your development with this session, and as well as get any feedback that I need in terms of any new topics that you'd like to see. So now I'm going to stop the recording, and then I'll talk about 3 upcoming events that I would like for y'all to put on your calendar.